Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a blue-red or Izzet Burn deck. So as the name implies, a deck with a lot of burn spells to try and kill the opponent with direct damage. But of course we do need some creatures to deal the early points of damage so that we can finish off our opponent with burn spells. So let's dive right into it here, starting out with a Lightning Axe, one of the few instances that only deals damage to creatures. So for a single red mana we get to deal 5 damage to target creature, but it does have the additional cost of either having to discard a card or having to pay 5 generic mana. So usually we will be discarding a card, but in this deck this is not really a downside, since we have a lot of cards with the Madness ability, so we can simply discard a card with Madness and then cast it through its Madness cost, so that we don't lose any card advantage. Next up is Jace, which is great in a deck full of instants and sorceries, gives us some card selection, will transform pretty quickly, and then we get Jace Telepath Unbound that can flash back instants and sorceries from our graveyard for additional value. Then we have Rattlechains, a 2-mana 2/1 flyer with flash, so nice evasion ability. We can cast it at the opponent's end step so that he can get in for some early points of damage. Has some other text here, but that's not very relevant. Then very similar to Rattlechains we have Dimensional Infiltrator, basically the same card but has the Void and some other ability here, but in this deck we don't have colorless mana, so we can't even activate this, so fills the same role as Rattlechains. We also have a Thing in the Ice, which is great in a deck with lots of instants and sorceries, but also just good in this deck because it's an early defender, an 0/4 blocker that can absorb some of the early damage, because otherwise we don't have a lot of defensive creatures in this deck, so this can save us a lot of damage. And then once we remove all the ice counters, we get Awoken Horror that bounces all the creatures, and then this is 7/8 that can just deal a lot of damage. And then finally our other flying 2-drop is Stormchaser Mage, blue and a red for a 1/3 with flying and haste, and also has the prowess ability, so whenever we cast a non-creature spell he gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and in a deck with lots of burn spells he's gonna get prowess pretty often, so he can get in there for at least 2 damage every turn. Then we get to our burn spells. We've got Ravaging Blaze, which is an X spell, so we'll be casting this in the late game once we have a lot of mana. Deals X damage to target creature, but with Spell Mastery also deals X damage to that creature's controller, and in a deck full of burn spells it's gonna be pretty easy to enable Spell Mastery in the late game. Then we have Twin Bolt, a nice versatile card. 2 mana for an instant that deals 2 damage divided as we choose amongst 1 or 2 target creatures and or players, so can take out 1 or 2 small creatures or can go to the opponent's face. And very similarly we have Avacyn's Judgement, which is the sorcery speed version of Twin Bolt, but also has the Madness ability, and if we can Madness this for X equals 3 or more, then it's even better than Twin Bolt. And then arguably the best card in the deck is Fevered Visions, a 3-mana enchantment that says at the beginning of each player's end step that player gets to draw a card, and then if that player is our opponent and has 4 or more cards in hand, Fevered Visions deals 2 damage to that player. So we get to draw an extra card at the beginning of our end step, so Fevered Visions will draw us into more burn spells, and then the opponent also gets to draw an extra card, but then usually Fevered Visions will be dealing them 2 damage, and having a card that deals 2 damage to the opponent every turn is pretty awesome. Then we get to Geistblast, 3 mana for an instant that deals 2 damage to target creature or player, and then this other interesting ability, if Geistblast is in our graveyard we can pay 2 and a blue to exile it from our graveyard and then copy target instant or sorcery spell we control, so basically an instant or sorcery that we are currently casting, and then we can choose new targets for that copy. So pretty awesome card in a late game if we get to copy a big burn spell for just 3 mana. Then we have Fiery Temper, 3 mana, 3 damage to target creature or player at instant speed, but also has Madness for a single red, so goes well with our Lightning Axe. Then Exquisite Firecraft, the best rate on a burn spell. For 3 mana we get to deal 4 damage to target creature or player at sorcery speed however, but also has spell mastery which makes it uncounterable. Then we have some more creatures. Akoum Firebird, 4 mana for a 3/3 flying haste, so usually gets in there for at least 3 damage when we cast it, and then has to attack each turn if able, which is not really a downside. And then Landfall, if we have a 6 mana available we can pay 6 mana and then get the Firebird back so that it can keep attacking. We also have Embermaw Hellion, 5 mana for a 4/5 with Trample, and then has this other interesting ability that goes well with our red burn spells. If another red source we control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1 to that permanent or player instead, so goes very well with cards like Fevered Visions will deal 3 damage, or burn spells deal 1 more, goes very well with cards like Twin Bolt and Avacyn's Judgement, since now we can deal basically 4 damage if we choose different targets, so it has a lot of applications. And of course a 4/5 with Trample can also just get in for a bit of damage. And then rounding out the deck we have 2 Planeswalkers. We've got Jace that can draw us extra cards and maybe even bounce a creature. And then we have Chandra, which can sweep the board or can just make some hasty elemental creature tokens that can get in there right away for some damage. And then our mana base, 7 islands, 9 mountains, 2 Wandering Fumarole, which can become a 1/4 or a 4/1 creature. Then 2 Sulfur Falls, and then 4 Evolving Wilds. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks acceptable. Do need to find some more lands, but we have turn 2 Stormchaser Mage, and then some instants to enable prowess. Let's see what we're up against. A Woodland Cemetery. So could be a lot of things. We're just gonna get in there for 1 damage and hope we draw a mountain next turn. Otherwise we might be in trouble. Opponent down to 19. And looks like no turn to play. And Sulfur Falls is excellent, so I think, let's see, few options here. We could go with Exquisite Firecraft, our opponent, and then basically deal 6 damage this turn. I like saving Fiery Temper because 1, it's an instant, and if we find a Lightning Axe it can combine nicely with Madness. But there is of course the risk that our opponent plays a creature that we might want to kill that has 4 toughness, and then we need the Firecraft. But there's not a ton of creatures with 4 toughness that are very problematic in green-black. Kalitas would be one of the few ones, so I think I'm okay with Firecrafting our opponent here and leaving the Fiery Temper in hand for now. So we can hit for 2. And then next turn, if our opponent plays something like a Tireless Tracker, we could consider using either Fiery Temper or Twin Bolt to deal with it. And instead it's gonna be a Nissa VASTWOOD Seer. So not a problem at the moment, so I don't think we're really incentivized to kill her, since we can just wait until our opponent has more lands in play. We found a Dimensional Infiltrator, and I think casting the Infiltrator here is going to be better than enabling Prowess, since that'll get us more damage in the future. And our opponent doesn't seem to have any interaction for our flying creatures. Opponent does however have Tireless Tracker plus a land, so they get landfall right away. And we could kill the Tireless Tracker right now to prevent our opponent from getting a second clue token. by twin bolting the tracker, but I think still getting the Infiltrator in play is going to be better, since this is kind of a racing situation, and your opponent having 2 clues in play is not going to be relevant if they don't have the time to sacrifice those clue tokens. So we get attacked for 2, which is fine, since we're easily winning this race. Play Infiltrator end of turn. Now we get to untap and deal lots of damage. And there's a Lightning Axe to go with our Fiery Temper, and I think we go with it right away, since that'll give us 2 prowess triggers. So Lightning Axe the tracker, discard Fiery Temper, and then cast Fiery Temper with Madness and deal 3 damage to our opponent, since we still don't care about the Nissa. Get 2 prowess triggers and attack for 5. So now our opponent needs to answer our creatures, otherwise they're just gonna die next turn to a Twin Bolt. And if we draw some more lands, then Ravaging Blaze is gonna be great. Opponent has Elvish Visionary, which is fine. So it doesn't look like our opponent is gonna be able to answer both of our creatures, and as long as one of them hits the opponent, then they're gonna be dead. So they could have a Grasp of Darkness here to kill one of them, but Twin Bolt plus a prowess trigger is gonna be enough to close out the game. Even Sylvan Advocate can't change anything about that. And that's why it's so important to have our creatures with flying, since that way it's a lot more difficult for the opponent to prevent that damage. And it's all about racing our opponent with burn spells and flying creatures. Alright, sweet. Well, let's move on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks pretty good. We've got a turn to Stormchaser Mage, plus some burn spells, so that's usually pretty good. And let's see what our opponent is up to. Evolving Wilds, so that's gonna remain a mystery for at least a turn. But we're just gonna run out the Mage and hit for 1. Next turn we can cast one of our 2 mana spells plus Evolving Wilds. Alright, our opponent's on green. Opponent goes to 19. And let's see what her turn to play is. Blue into Press for Answers. Alright, not a card you see very often. So our opponent could be playing some sort of blue-green clues deck, since there are a lot of clue synergies in blue-green. Unfortunately the Mage is tapped down, so we won't get any prowess value, so might as well go with the Infiltrator that we drew. So let's go Wilds, pause a turn, and then we can Infiltrator end of turn. And this is gonna get a mountain, I believe. So let's sacrifice Evolving Wilds, get a mountain, and cast the Infiltrator. See if that resolves. It does. And another Infiltrator. Alright, so I think I'm okay with using the Judgement for an extra prowess trigger. And then we can cast the other Infiltrator on the opponent's end step. So we can hit for 4. Opponent is gonna sacrifice a clue. And drop to 13. So the only thing we probably should be worried about is a potential sweeper like Planar Outburst, since we are committing a lot of creatures. But the good thing about the flash creatures, of course, is that they usually get in for at least 2 points, because you can play them when the coast is clear. So opponent ramping with Explosive Vegetation, but looks like we got enough early damage in that our opponent doesn't feel confident about this game anymore. So we can Judgement plus Twin Bolt, that's essentially 6 damage, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then Geistblast next turn should be good enough. So let's go for that. And hope our opponent can't gain any life next turn. Could have also gone with the Geistblast to get it in the graveyard and potentially use the ability here, but we're pretty constrained on mana, so that doesn't look like that's gonna work. So even if our opponent has a sweeper here, they're dead to Geistblast. If we draw land, we can activate the Fumarole. And Westvale Abbey is not gonna help them. Alright, so it looks like maybe our opponent was playing some sort of fog deck. Maybe their win condition could be something like Sphinx's Tutelage. But I'll take the win here, so on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look here at the hand that looks pretty appealing, since we have Lightning Axe plus Fiery Temper. We've got all our colors. If we draw one more land, we can play out a Firebird. So can't get a lot better than this. I guess a 2-drop creature would complete it, and there we go, Rattlechains. So we can go with end of turn Rattlechains next turn. If our opponent plays any relevant creature, we can go with Lightning Axe plus Fiery Temper. It looks like our opponent is on Mardu colors, white, black and red. Stormchaser Mage is interesting, so we could go with Stormchaser Mage here, get in for 1. Or we can go with Rattlechains end of turn. They're both pretty good. But what's better? If we can enable Prowess next turn, then Mage is better. But doesn't look like we will be enabling Prowess next turn, since we would want to play the other creature. So in that case, I think playing the Rattlechains is a bit better, as that gives our opponent less information about what they should play or not. So let's go with Rattlechains end of turn. Opponent still playing tapped lands, this time a Canopy Vista. Give the Rattlechains hexproof. And Sulfur Falls. So I think I'm okay with running out a Stormchaser here. Even if your opponent has a sweeper next turn, we're gonna follow up with a Firebird. So the 1 extra point of damage seems relevant, even though we might lose one of our creatures. Opponent has a removal spell for the Rattlechains, which is gonna work. So that makes it less likely that our opponent will cast a sweeper anytime soon. So they only take 1. Could still cast Lightning Axe on the opponent's turn, but we don't really want to, since we would like to Fiery Temper. Opponent has another removal spell in Reef Soul. So if they have another Fiery Temper, they could, with Spell Mastery, kill the Firebird. But I think we still run it out there and hope our opponent doesn't have all the removal spells here. On the bright side, it looks like they're stuck on 3 lands. And they did not have the second Fiery Impulse. There's land number 4, also comes into play tapped, so our opponent playing a pretty greedy mana base comes at a cost. We could play Jace, but I'm pretty sure our opponent has some sort of sweeper. So I would rather keep up one of our burn spells like Geistblast or Lightning Axe plus Fiery Temper. So let's hit for 3. And then we can pass a turn. And I think if our opponent doesn't play any creatures that we want to kill, we just go Geistblast our opponent for 2. That way we have it in the graveyard to maybe combine with a Lightning Axe later. And our opponent could activate the Shambling Vent, but they elect not to wisely. So let's Geistblast our opponent for 2. Untap. Another Geistblast, alright, so let's hit for 3 once again. Opponent does have Avacyn, but in response to the trigger here, making Avacyn indestructible, we can Lightning Axe, discarding Fiery Temper, cast Fiery Temper, targeting our opponent. So our opponent won't get to block our Firebird. Opponent takes 3 more. And I think now playing out Jace is fine. If our opponent spends a turn casting a Sweeper, then we still have a lot of action here. So the important part there was casting our removal spell in response to the trigger here, making Avacyn indestructible. So our opponent could activate Shambling Vent if they don't have anything else to do, but that means they probably won't be able to kill the Firebird. So they'll take damage either way. Oblivion Sower is not gonna do it, unless our opponent gets very lucky on the lands and can still cast a removal spell off of them. They hit 2 mountains, so if they have another removal spell they could kill the bird. But looks like that's not the case. Even drew an Exquisite Firecraft. So we can transform Jace if we want to. We could even transform Jace, flashback Lightning Axe, and then copy it with Geistblast in order to kill the Oblivion Sower, which is pretty awesome. But we can just attack with the Firebird and then Firecraft our opponent to death, which also seems good. Could also discard Fiery Temper to Jace here with Madness, also pretty stylish. So I guess we go with that. Discard Fiery Temper, cast it with Madness, targeting our opponents, and then we can even copy it with Geistblast. Alright, so got to show that little interaction. On to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which has a few too many lands. Let's try another one. This one looks acceptable. We've got a turn 2 play and turn 3 Fevered Visions. And Evolving Wild's gonna get a mountain here. So we can go turn 2 Stormchaser Mage into turn 3 Fevered Visions, enabling prowess. Or we can go Rattlechains end of turn, hit for 2. So overall the mage is gonna do more damage here if it survives. So I think we just run out the mage, since we do want to deploy the Fevered Visions as soon as possible. Because then our opponent is more likely to have multiple cards in hand, so that Fevered Visions deals the 2 damage. Of course, being on the play also makes Fevered Visions a lot better, because then the opponent has an extra card in hand. Declaration in Stone is gonna take care of the Stormchaser Mage. Gives us a clue token. But I think we still run out the Fevered Visions over the Rattlechains. And hope our opponent doesn't have a way to remove it. So we draw an extra card. It's a land. So next turn we can go Rattlechains and or Twin Bolt end of turn. Maybe even sacrifice a clue. Alright, so opponent with Oath of Gideon. So it looks like they're playing a Planeswalker based deck. They do get dealt 2 damage. And another Rattlechains, alright. So I think the plan is double Rattlechains end of turn. Could use a Twin Bolt to deal with the tokens, but they're not really bothering me at the moment. Ravaging Blaze is not bad, although we don't have any instants or sorceries in the graveyard. Opponent could be casting a Planeswalker here. Instead it's going to be an Explosive Vegetation, getting 2 lands. Opponent can attack for 2. And then we're gonna play out our Rattlechains. And next turn we get to attack for 4. Opponent gets dealt 2 damage by Fevered Visions. No blocks here, of course. So they're gonna take 6 down to 11. And then we have 4 more here, down to 7, plus Ravaging Blaze. So we're getting close to killing our opponent here. Do we want to cast this Judgement? I think we do. And I think we target our opponent. Do have to keep this Shambling Vent in mind, which our opponent could activate, but if they spend 4 mana activating and attacking with the Vent, it's a lot less likely that they get to deploy their hand, so they still take 2 damage from the Visions. So the 2 life they would gain from the Vent is kind of offset by the Visions. So I don't think we need to keep up enough mana for Ravaging Blaze to deal with the event here. So I want to be as mana efficient as possible and just cast the Judgement for 2. And then attack our opponent with our 2 Rattlechains. And I guess we hope our opponent doesn't have another Declaration, because then they could deal with both Rattlechains at once. Get to draw an extra card, another Blaze, alright, so Twin Bolt end of turn enables the 2 Blazes here. And with 3 open mana it's also pretty unlikely that Vent gets activated here, but you never know. The tokens attack for 2. Could also see a Sweeper here, because our opponent probably wants to deal with our 2 Rattlechains. But we don't really care. It's going to be a Chandra, however, which does present a clock for the opponent. So -1s to deal with our creatures, and next turn our opponent could be making 2 elementals to attack us. And Fevered Visions will deal 2 damage to our opponent since they're close to dead. So now we can Ravaging Blaze for 4. Although there's no creature on the battlefield quite yet, we can wait until our opponent activates the Chandra to basically deal 4 damage to our opponent. So we don't have to sacrifice a clue here, I think. Chandra gets plussed. And attackers are declared. And then I think we do this. X damage to target creature. Our opponent could kill the creature in response to make the Blaze fizzle, but doesn't look like they have any instant speed removal. And LINYALA is gonna gain our opponent 5 life, so they're not dead. So they're gonna drop down to 4, but then the second Ravaging Blaze is gonna be a lethal. And let's do that right now. And hope our opponent can't remove LINYALA. And there we go. Sweet, on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our hand. Only one land, so I think we unfortunately have to mulligan. Alright, this one's pretty good. We do have some expensive cards here that we might not be able to cast right away, but we do have 2 early plays, so that should bridge the gap nicely. Opponent on turn 1, Vampiric Rites. So already a way for them to gain life potentially, which is not good for us. Here I don't think we mind drawing more lands, so I think we go with Fumarole over the Wilds. And then next turn we have to decide which one of our 2-drops we want to play. Our opponent with Deathcap Cultivator turn 2. Don't have a way to kill the Cultivator. So I think we go with a Rattlechains end of turn, since it doesn't look like we have a way to enable Prowess quite yet. Although, I guess it's also fine to go with the Mage. It gives our opponent a little bit more information, perhaps, than playing the Rattlechains end of turn. But if we do draw a removal spell, we probably want to deal with the Cultivator. Could even consider Ravaging Blaze for 1 to enable Prowess. So yeah, I think going with the Mage is fine here. Get 1 damage now, 1 damage or potentially 2 damage next turn. So adds up to the same as an attack with Rattlechains. But there are some subtle differences. Opponent is going to attack for 2, so they're not using the extra mana. And Canopy Vista and pass a turn. So this came into play tapped, so we don't have a strong indication that our opponent could use the extra mana of the Cultivator, but I think it's usually safer to kill the Cultivator. Downside, of course, is our opponent has Vampiric Rites mana available, so it's not very appealing to kill the Cultivator when our opponent can just sacrifice it and gain a life. So all things considered, I think it's better to just play the Rattlechains end of turn instead of trying to kill the Cultivator. So let's hit for 1, go with Evolving Wilds. This will get a mountain, and then Rattlechains. Opponent attacks for 2 once again. We could ambush the Cultivator by flashing in Rattlechains and trying to block, but I would rather deal more damage to our opponent. And the Woodland Wanderer is a pretty big problem, since it's 5/5 Vigilance Trample, so that's gonna deal a lot of damage. And we, besides a Lightning Axe, we don't have a lot of good ways to deal with it. Well, speak of the devil. Guess we Lightning Axe right now, so that way our opponent can't sacrifice a Wanderer to the rights. We can discard the island. We don't mind having more lands, but I'm sure that we can draw 1 more land for Chandra in the coming 2 turns. So let's Lightning Axe right now, so we also get the Prowess trigger, of course. And we could also consider Ravaging Blaze for 1 to deal with the Deathcap Cultivator, and actually don't mind doing this. We didn't have Spell Mastery quite yet, so we didn't deal 1 damage to our opponent, but we do deal 5 damage right now. And next turn we could attack with the Fumarole as well, which is another 4. So if your opponent sweeps the board here, that's not even that bad. Instead our opponent with another enchantment that requires some setup and that isn't gonna do anything right away, which is good for us. So we can activate the Fumarole, can attack, make sure to switch the Fumarole's power and toughness. Opponent all the way down to 6. And next turn Chandra might be good enough. Opponent with Priest of the Bloodrite. So they might end up losing 2 life to the Priest, but they can also sacrifice it to the Vampiric Rites to gain 1 life. So we can play Chandra, make 2 3/1s, attack with everyone. Our opponent can block one of the 3/1s with a Priest, 1 with a Demon, and then they take 4 and still have a Demon in play, which could kill Chandra. Still think that's our best play here, and kind of forces our opponent to attack Chandra with a Demon. And then we'll still have the 2 Fliers in play to hopefully close out the game. We could wait, but our opponent is gonna keep these on defense since they're low on life, so it's not like we're gonna surprise them with a Chandra and making 2 3/1s. And using the minus here doesn't do much, using the 0 ability doesn't do much. So yeah, let's go with Chandra. Also enables prowess. And I think attacking here is better than not attacking, since this limits our opponent's options. While if we don't attack with anyone, hoping the Priest kills our opponent, they can just sacrifice it and gain some life. So they elect to kill the Mage instead of one of the Elementals, which is fine, but they take 1 more damage. So they could kill Chandra, but we still have the Rattlechains and the Fumarole, which can hopefully finish off our opponent. Plus, if we draw any of our many burn spells, that's also good. Oath of Nissa is gonna reveal something, and it's gonna be Obnixilis, which I don't really mind. Opponent can't plus it, minus can only kill the Rattlechains. Opponent kind of forced to attack Chandra here. Opponent doesn't have the cards to stay alive here. Sacrifice a demon, gain a life, draw a card, get a token by sacrificing the clue. But Chandra, I guess we can use a 0 ability, haven't used this ability very often, and try to hit a burn spell. There we go. So we can finish off our opponent with the Twin Bolt rather than an attack. I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay, and as always, have a nice day.